as their old friends. So welcome, and we're going to have a lovely time. Thank you.
It truly is my pleasure this morning to be able to introduce my friend Vic DiGenti. He's an award-winning author.
You have to really put that mic in front of your mouth.
Front of your mouth.
We can hear you. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear him now?
That's better.
Okay. Vic is an award-winning author who's penned 6 novels, a whole collection of short stories, and 12 nonfiction books. He's working as a ghostwriter and a biography for the past 9 years, and penned biographies and family histories for World War II veterans, jazz musicians, entrepreneurs, and former CEOs. He has also edited and published books for other individuals under his press. His imprint is called Windrusher Hall Press. He's a member of the Association of Ghostwriters. He's a longtime member and former executive vice president of the Florida Writers Association, and he serves on the board of the Beaches Museum. Vic lives here in Ponte Vedra Beach with his lovely wife Yvonne, and as he describes them, 4 frisky cats. You can visit and learn more about Vic at his website, which is, it's going to be hard to remember, but www.windrusherhallpress.com. Windrusherhallpress.com. But I have a personal story to tell you. I can't remember exactly when I met Vic, but it was some time ago. And my late husband had just been diagnosed with cancer. And we had never done any of the legacy writing we wanted to do to tell the story of his immigrant parents, for his 6 children and grandchildren and the family to come. So I called Vic one day because I knew he was a writer, and I said, Vic, do you know anybody who could help us write Dan's story? And he said, Barbara, that's what I do. And I said, well, welcome, can we do this? And this is the book that resulted. We had both hard copies and paperbacks made. And you'll notice the title, or maybe you can't read it, but it's called Blueberry Fields Forever. If you remember the Beatles song, Strawberry Fields Forever, well, my late husband was the son of a farmer in the Catskills. And he earned the money to go to college by picking blueberries in the hills of the Catskills and selling them to the resorts in the Catskills. He ultimately worked his way through and earned a PhD at NYU. But Vic is the one who's recorded this story for us, and it's been a real joy to the family. So please, Vic, thank you.
Thank you, folks. Let me unload some of the books I was going to show you, including Dan's book. That sounded pretty impressive, didn't it? Ooh, and you know, she didn't even include one of the accolades my wife is always happy to tell people, which is, he's a legend in his own mind. Bear with me.
Rick, did you speak here before?
Many years ago, yes, I did.
I was there.
Were you here then?
The Army guy, World War II guy.
And I'm going to talk about Marty.
Okay.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you so much, Barbara, for that introduction. Couldn't have written it better myself. And Kirk, thank you for the invitation. How many of you are members of the Legacy Group? Wonderful, wonderful. I've been writing most of my life, and I've learned that everybody has a story to tell. And that certainly came true as I started working with individuals, writing their biographies, family histories. And I know that those of you out here must have some powerful life experiences that you're writing about. How many of you have already started writing a biography or a memoir? Okay, wonderful. How many have actually finished one and maybe published it? 1, okay, 2. Well, that's great. You are among a very small percentage of people. I read a report that said 97% of people who start a book never finish it. So congratulations. But being in a group like this is really going to help you a lot. Is this, when you meet, is it sort of a critique group? Do you go over what people have been writing?
We do not really critique, we just listen and enjoy.
I see, okay, that's okay. As Barbara said, I've written about a dozen biographies, family history, different books for people. And as I said, everybody had a great story to tell. And among those are former residents and current residents here. And as Barbara said, Blueberry Fields Forever. I wrote about Barbara's former husband, Dan, who had a really fascinating life story to tell. And you mentioned Marty Olson. Many of you may remember Marty. He was here for a number of years. And Marty is actually the man that got me started in all this. I was writing novels and short stories, etc., and I was in the middle of a short story. And I lead a group of writers at the public library here in Ponte Vedra Beach. We meet every month. And one day after our meeting, Marty came up to me and he had a little notebook in his hand, and he said, "Vic," and I'd known Marty because we were in a investment group together, and he had told me he was trying to write his biography, and he said, "You know, I'm not really a writer," and he handed me this 3-ring binder. He said, "I'd appreciate it if you'd look this over, and I'd like to get it published pretty soon." And Marty was 90 years old at the time. And so I looked it over for him. I gave him a 2-page evaluation, and he called me a few days later and he said, "This is just what I need. Can you write it for me?" And I was in the middle of another novel, but knowing Marty, I went ahead and did that. And that was the very first one I ever did. After I did Dan's biography, Barbara and her brother John commissioned me to write a family history of the Haugen landmark family. A couple of their grandparents that came over from Scandinavia, and they were penniless, didn't know the language, and the result are brilliant people like Barbara, several generations later. Another one is commissioned from my good friend and your resident here at Vickers, Sarah Anthony. She commissioned me to write the story of her grandfather, James Rembert Anthony. And talk about fascinating life experiences. This man who was in business here in Florida in the early 1900s was successful in retail. He and his brother had 4 very successful stores, men's haberdashery. He was in banking, real estate, and he ended up in insurance in Jacksonville. So great life stories. I want to show you a couple of others that these wrote in the last few years. This one's called The Last Beach Boy. It's a story of Robert Solano's life. It's a rags to riches story. Bobby, all his friends called him Bobby, grew up very, very poor. He was part of the Menorcan generation out of St. Augustine. They basically lived by hunting and fishing. That was the food they put on the table, and he grew up to be a very successful entrepreneur. Another one, this was a real fun one to write. Bill Prince, wonderful musician. He plays 8 different instruments. He's 86 now, still playing with different bands. Every time they call him, said, "Can you play tonight?" He'll say, "Well, what instrument do you want me to play?" So I've had this honor of working with these people who have some marvelous life stories. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the differences between biographies and memoirs. Is anybody working on a memoir? Persons? No, mostly biography. Well, a biography, as I'm sure you know, is your life story, and the person whose life it is, they're writing the biography. And an autobiography is supposedly, no, I'm sorry, the biography is written by someone else. The autobiography is supposedly written by that person, the subject, right? And that's not always the case, because over 60% of the nonfiction bestsellers. These are books by celebrities, politicians, sports heroes, if you will. These are all ghostwritten, over 60% of them. Now, a memoir, on the other hand, is more of a slice of life. It's about a time in a person's life that is often very troubled, something dark has happened, and they've had to work their way through it. What I found, though, in working with people, and I haven't actually written a specific memoir. I've mostly written the biographies and the family histories. But the way I work on a biography, I'll work with the individual and I'll conduct hours of interviews, trying to get to the heart of their story. And people are just normally very, very open about their lives. And I've been honored to hear intimate moments of their lives, their highs and their lows, if you will. And then after I get this and record it all, and I find what I feel are the strongest pieces of their lives, I thread it all together into a compelling narrative that the reader wants to read, obviously. Biographies are mostly written in chronological order, right? And it would make sense that you start at the beginning. But everybody was born at some time, and it'd be rather boring if you started every book saying, well, I was born in 1940 at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning. What I try to do is find a dramatic spot in this person's life, if you will, and start there, because you have to get a reader's attention. People have very short attention spans these days. You know, you look at TV shows and movies and they move very quickly. So when they open a book, they're expecting that same kind of speed and they want to get into it very quickly. I've always been a big, hi there, come on in. I've always been a big proponent of instant gratification. But I'm finding now more and more often that it's just too long to get to it. So what you try to do with when you open a book is find a way to grab people's attention. As I mentioned Marty Olson earlier, I use him as an example. Marty, when he contacted me, he wanted a major emphasis on his World War II experiences, but he was also a very successful businessman. And he grew up in New York. His father had a small machine shop in Brooklyn, and he helped his father even as a young boy. He was making deliveries. He talked about that. But he had a powerful story about his World War II service. He was a radio man in World War II. After the war, he was very lucky. He never suffered any wounds. He went back and started working for his father. He eventually took over that shop and built it into something completely different, sold it to a conglomerate, made a lot of money, and he and his wife moved here to Ponte Vedra Beach, and they ended their days here in Vickers. So when I was looking after doing all the interviews and what Marty had already written, I decided to start with his World War II service. And this is how I introduced the book. You have to excuse me, and writing is pretty small, typing. Actually, I think I have it written out here. Maybe this is a little larger. Yes. They told us the European winter of 1944-45 was one of the coldest and wettest in decades. Snow fell constantly. The ground was cold, was rock hard, frozen solid. Despite our layers of clothing, the bone-chilling cold was impossible to avoid. Loaded with 50 pounds of equipment, we tripped and slid across the ice-covered terrain. Admittedly, this wasn't the best time to visit France. But I wasn't a tourist. not in the traditional sense of the word. I'd been drafted, trained, and shipped overseas to help stop Hitler's war machine. The Allied forces were fighting a German juggernaut that had overwhelmed one country after another and threatened our national security. The European theater of operations would be my home away from home for over a year, along with millions of other amateur soldiers thrust into combat after only 17 weeks of basic training. So this really, I think, got across what Marty wanted people to know about him, because that was one of the main themes of his story. Was he felt that 17 weeks of basic training, they were amateur soldiers, and this included a lot of the officers as well. Now, Bobby Solano's book that I had mentioned, when I started working with him, he had been working on trying to put together a biography, and he had remarkable experiences as a young boy, and growing up on the beach, which is why we ended up calling it The Last Beach Boy, and fishing, mullet, turtle hunting. They would find these turtle eggs and the nests and take 50%, half of the eggs. He said, we never took more than half. And of course, this was before the protection for turtles and that sort of thing. But he had told me a story about when he was a boy, he would accompany his grandfather, who was his father's best friend as children. And his father died at a very early age, and basically the grandfather took him in. And so from about the age of 6 or 7 on, he lived with he called him his pop, and his grandmother, and his pop would take him everywhere and teach him life lessons. They'd go hunting together. And he told me the story about accompanying Pop and other hunters to a hunting ground, and they would spend the weekend there. And at night, the men would gather around and they'd drink whiskey and tell stories. And he would listen in. And one of the stories he told me was about his father as a teenager. I think he was 17 at the time. And along with Pop, his best friend, they ran moonshine for Pop's father. You gotta remember, this was in the wilds of the early 1900s. And in this particular case, the story told, they were running moonshine up to Carolina, and they found out the federal agents were on their trail. And so it was a fascinating story, because they ended up sleeping with a waitress he made a friend of. So there was a little sex involved. So it was a pretty spicy story involved. But that's how I started the book. And he had, as I said, an very interesting life. And he went on and started. First, he was digging ditches for the Jacksonville Beach Utility Company, but a friend of his got him a job with Pick and Save, which was I don't know how many of you are from Jacksonville area, but Pick and Save was a big company, but it was just starting out then, and he worked his way up, and he became an entrepreneur and did very, very well. And in Barbara's book, Dan's book that we did, she told you about Dan had a bout of cancer, and on his 80th birthday, Barbara threw this grand birthday bash for Dan at the Ponte Vedra Inn and Club, and invited all his friends and family, and etc. And so I started out with that birthday bash. It is their 80th birthday, and I wrote about how people came from as far away as Bangkok and Panama, and it was just quite a celebration of Dan's life. And then we went back and wrote about Dan's life and some of the great accomplishments he had and some of his struggles as well. Now, as I mentioned, the memoirs are a different animal. They were a slice of life, and a lot of people that start writing not only memoirs, but any kind of book, they find that getting started is the hardest part. How do you start a book? You know, where do you start a book? Especially if it's something like a memoir or a biography. Well, there's a three-step formula, if you will, for writing memoirs that you should keep in mind. And the first part is called the breaking point. You find the most dramatic, the darkest part of your story. And remember that the memoir is just a certain part of your life. It's not your full life. And you tell them what is going on in your life at that point. How many of you read The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls? This was about her dysfunctional family, and boy, was it dysfunctional. Well, her opening sentence is, "I was sitting in a taxi wondering if I had overdressed for the evening when I looked out the window and saw Mom rooting through a dumpster." That's going to get your attention. So what you're doing is you're trying to find that piece of your life story that's going to grab people's attention and get them asking questions and wanting to know more. You know, why did this happen? What's going to go? How are they going to get out of it? Salman Rushdie recently wrote a memoir called Knife: Meditations After an Attempted Murder. And he starts with the assassination attempt. He writes, "At 11:15 on August 12, 2022, on a sunny Friday morning in upstate New York, I was attacked and almost killed by a young man with a knife after I came on stage at the amphitheater in Chautauqua to talk about the importance of keeping writers safe from harm." Amazing. Well, you don't have to have survived an assassination attempt to have something dramatic in your life, right? So find that hook, if you will, and look for an incident that resonates with the readers and leaves them wondering, you know, how or why this happened and how you're going to get out of it. Now, after the breaking point that you started with, the next part is the backstory. You need to go back and tell people what brought you up to that particular moment in time. You'll fill out your story with as many telling details about your life and what you've gone through that brought you to that moment. Cheryl Strayed's memoir, Wild, From Lost to Found on the Pacific Crest Trail, she opens with an experience of being on the trail. She's halfway through an 1,100-mile trek, and she talks about losing her boot, one of her boots that she needs to walk the trail, that fell over while she was taking a break over the mountainside. And she goes on a little bit about what she experienced here and there, and that leads her into the backstory, which is how her life fell apart after her mother died. She went through a divorce. She got hooked on heroin and became a sex addict. And then she read this book about the Pacific Crest Trail, and she decided, I'm going to do that. I'm going to walk this trail. And basically, that's how she turned her life around. And the final part of writing this memoir would be the resolution. How are you going to wrap this all up to let people know that you've come through this and you've got your life together? Or maybe not. You know, there's not always a happy ending. Sometimes people are still struggling through it. Well, whatever it is, be upfront, and it has to be in the same tone and voice that you've been writing throughout the book. And remember that the memoir is not a biography. You don't have to write your life story. Even if you're writing a biography and it's your life story, doesn't mean you have to write every single thing that's happening. That's why a lot of people never finish. I mean, they write for months and months, and they realize, well, I'm only up to the 5th grade. You know, maybe this isn't as fun as I thought. They decide, well, I'll go back and go through the Wordle archive, you know. That'll be a lot more fun, you know. So just think about the major parts of your life. You know, what really impacted you? What brought change about in your lives? What made you the person you are today? Those of us here that are writing belong to a select group. I'm always most comfortable when I'm sitting in front of my computer. Even though my wife says you need to get up and exercise, walk around. But I hope you feel that same compulsion if you're a writer that you need to sit down, you need to get those words on paper, etc. So to that end, I'm going to end with a quote from the great Ray Bradbury, science fiction author. He wrote, "Many people hear voices when no one is there. Some of them are called mad and are shut up in rooms all day and stare at the walls. Others are called writers, and they do pretty much the same thing." I'd like to hear some of your experiences. Thank you. I'd like to hear some of your experiences, any questions you might have, what might you're stuck on, or need some advice on. Let me know. Anybody? Yes?
How hard is it to get a book published?
Well, it's easy to get a book published because today you can become your own publisher. To be traditionally published is hard. There are now 5 major publishers, and there used to be about 20 of them, and they just kept gobbling each other up. And particularly in the way the economy's gone the last 5-10 years, they're looking for bestsellers. And particularly in the biography field, the memoir field, unless you're a major name, unless you're somebody with a platform that has 100,000 people on their social media, they're not going to talk to you. So that's why a lot of people go to independent publishing. With it being an independent publisher, whether you do it yourself, and it's very easy, you can go on Amazon and upload your manuscript and cover and have it all done within a day or so. If you're by chance you're with a traditional publisher, my first 3 books were traditionally published, and then I started my own press, and with the rest of my books, including the ones I write for other people, they're independently published on my own imprint. So that's the way the publishing business has gone. So it's awfully good because you have that opportunity, but also that means if you're trying to sell your book, you're out there with a couple of million other books. There's more than 1 million books that are added to Amazon every year. So a bit of competition. So that's why you need that platform to let people know who you are and more about your book. Most of the books I've written, and of the dozen, only 3 wanted these available for sale for people to purchase. So we put them on Amazon. That included Marty's book, Bob Solano's book, and Bill Prince's, the musician's book. So those are all available for sale. But I always tell people what I've just told you, that not to expect huge numbers of sales just because of that, because they're not well known, even if they have these fascinating stories to tell. So most of the books, 3/4 of them are legacy projects. They want them for their family, for their friends, to document lives well lived, and because sometimes family members, cousins, nephews, etc., don't know what their grandparents went through, or even their parents. I mean, I have a friend of mine who does the same sort of thing I do, that writes biographies, and at the end of his emails, he has this quote that he heard on an NPR interview with a ghostwriter, and I'll paraphrase it because I'm not sure I have it right, but it was something like, when my grandfather wanted to talk to me about his life, I was too young to sit down and listen. When I was ready to listen, my grandfather couldn't remember. So, You know, I always tell people if they're interested in doing this, go ahead and do it as quickly as possible. Because memory is a very fickle thing, as we know. Questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, when I started this legacy class, I started writing in a third-party way. In other words, Bill did this and so forth and so on. And I did that, I guess, because I didn't want to kind of brag about something or something like that. But then I eventually changed that
Right.
to just writing, I did this. How do you feel about those two writing styles?
I think they're both excellent. Third person works very well, and I've done books in third person. I've also done them in first person. Bill Prince's book is in first person. Bob Solano's book is in first person. Others are in third person. Mr. Anthony's book is in third person, and I must say, and thank again Sarah for what she brought to this project was 5 journals that her grandfather had written that had all this wonderful detail that I was able to use in this book. It turned out to be as much of a history book of Florida as well as Mr. Anthony's book. But I would say, how far are you into it, Bill?
Well, I guess, when I first joined the Legacy Group, and so forth, many years ago, I was writing in third person, and I probably did maybe 15 or 20 short stories on that. And then and I don't know why I changed, but I changed, and everything since that time has been,
Right.
you know, on that.
Yeah. As you know, the first person is a much more intimate style. You're inside the person's head all the time, and you're experiencing what the protagonist, the subject is experiencing, because they're telling you, and they're telling you how they feel and what happened, etc. Third person, you're back a little bit, you have more distance, but I think they work well. I mean, get some feedback from other people, I'm sure you have, in the Legacy Group, and what they feel works best. But I don't think you can go wrong with either one. I've actually started out working in first person for one of the people I was working with, and he felt uncomfortable with it, and I went back and rewrote it in third person, which took a while, as you can expect. Other questions?
Thank you.
Yes.
Excuse me, how do you work with someone who wants to write a biography or memoir? What would be the process?
Well, first thing is we sit down and have an initial conversation about what they hope to achieve with this book. And I talk to them about my process and what I expect of them, and we talk about budget. And then after we come to an agreement, I write a proposal, not a proposal. If they've already agreed, I'll write an agreement, send them the agreement. And then from there, I would typically send them a list of questions that they should think about. I ask them to write a timeline of the major events in their lives, both the good and the bad. And then I sit down with them. And we have a series of conversations, go over the questions, and those are expanded, learn more about their life. It's a biography. We start at the beginning, obviously, and usually it takes a little time for the person to loosen up, for us to get adjusted to each other. And you always want to work with somebody you feel comfortable with. And then I record every one of these. It might have 15 hours of conversation. And depending on the kind of book it is and the kind of person in their lives, like I wrote Walter Dickinson's biography. Walter, if you've lived in the area, was a very successful commercial real estate guy. He lives in Jacksonville Beach, had quite a life. So I not only interviewed him, I interviewed family members, his children, and about 6 of his former co-workers. So there was a lot of interviewing, and I had all these recordings, and then I transcribed them all, and then go through them, decide what's the most impactful parts of his life, and then I typically do an outline that I show to the person, and then we go forward. I start writing, and I'll write 5 or 10 chapters before I send it back to my client. And if they have any changes or suggestions, that's where we make them, and then I'll typically finish the whole book, and then we go through the process again of making revisions, etc.
In that case, how long did that take, that whole process?
Typically, it's about 8 to 10 months. 8 to 10 months, and depending again on any changes that they might make and what might come up, etc. But that's an average.
And then would you publish it yourself through your
Yes.
publishing company?
As I said, and Barbara mentioned, I have my own imprint. It's called Windrusher Hall Press, and I named that after my first 3 books, which were adventure fantasies about a cat named Windrusher. And they sold very well, and when I decided I would be an independent publisher, I said, oh, let's name it after Windrusher. And I didn't write my first book until after I retired, and wasn't sure exactly what I was going to write about. And my wife and I had had cats for about 30 years. She had volunteered for a cat rescue organization for a while, and then I helped out over there, and so we always had cats. And I had one cat who would just love to lay out on my keyboard when I was trying to type. And so I decided that was a sign I should write a book about a cat. That's how it all started. Yes?
I have a question. Given how intense this process is, do you only do one at a time?
Typically I do, but I have taken on a second client depending on it. I've also do some editing and book doctoring and helping people through it. So and depending on where I am in the process, I can sometimes work on a second as well.
How do you feel about the use of photographs?
Of what?
Photographs.
Oh, photographs.
Yeah, how do you feel
Oh,
about the use of photographs?
Absolutely. There are always 20 to 30 photographs in every one of the biographies, and I think that's an important part of the book. That really brings the book to life, and I should say, along with all the interviews and everything I do a lot of research. So I add context to that person's life. Like for Marty's life, I did a lot of research on World War II, on the draft process, on the battles that he participated in. Marty was in a unit that helped liberate one of the concentration camps, and so I did a lot of research. So the research really helps, and I know Sarah will tell you that with her book, I did an awful lot of research. There's about 8.5 pages of a bibliography in this book, and tells you all the books I read and sites I visited to find the important parts of this book. Yes, Barbara?
Well, you even tracked down the ships that my Scandinavian grandparents came on. I was blown away when he gave us the name and the dates that they actually landed in the United States. It was amazing.
That's a fun part. I've always loved research and history, so that really makes it important to me to add this kind of contextual detail to a book that helps really establish the person's life. Anybody else? Yes, Kirk?
I have been writing for Legacy for 8 years now, so I feel as though I've covered most of my life. But one of our grandsons, to whom I have given all of my papers, gave me this for Christmas. I want to hear your story, grandmother. And here's the book. And I said, but Ted, I've already given you my story. And he said, no, I want you to answer every one of the things in this book. Are you familiar with one of these books that
There are several like that
supposed to
that I have.
spark your memory and you're
Right,
supposed to
exactly. And
write
that's
about
important.
something?
Yeah, that's good.
I have not written a word.
But at least you remember the book. Anybody else? Yes.
What if you have disagreements with the client?
Disagreement, in what way?
And what should be included, and or how something, if
Well, I always believe the customer is always right. It is your book. Now, I've had disagreements with people about what I thought was more important than something else or the way that something should be phrased, but in the final analysis, as I said, it's your book. If that's what you want, that's fine. With Bobby, who was a very strong-willed man and wanted to do all these things that I thought were superfluous, adding many, many quotes and pieces of music and all this stuff, and I said, okay, if that's what you want, and that's what we did. But again, I think a writer's role is to let the subject know, and in the ghostwriting business, they call their clients the author, because it's supposed to be their book. Now, in almost every book, I've received a co-author credit. In some, I have not. So when my name does not appear, then I'm a ghostwriter. Otherwise, I'm a co-author. And Sarah was very kind to let me just put my name on her book. So thank you. But yes, I think there are places for disagreement, but in the end, you know, if it's your book, you decide this is the way you want it, that's the way we'll do it. Well, thank you very much, folks. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming. This inspires us to keep writing.
Oh, and I have a newsletter I send out. If anybody is interested in being on it and receiving it, I'll pass this along. Just give me your name and your email address. And if anybody actually has interest in further communication with me, I'll be happy to sit down and talk with you. I have business cards, or you can go to my website, windrusherhallpress.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we need to encourage any of you to join us every Thursday at 11 o'clock, right here in this same room. So we have a lot of fun hearing about other funny stories.
You would be amazed at what wonderful lives people have lived who live here at Vickers Landing. Very different, very fascinating, and so please come and join us. You don't have to write anything, just come and listen the first few times, and we hope you'll be inspired to begin writing. Thank you for coming.
Number of years.
No kidding.
The way that he told it.
They were gonna probably
9/11. 10 years after.
So